الله بالخير. لعل الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وحلفائها يتلاعبون بالنظام العالمي منذ أنشئ عقب الحرب العالمية الثانية. صناعة حقوق الإنسان كتاب يسهب في طرح ملاحظات ألفريد ديزياس المدافع المخضرم عن حقوق الإنسان الذي خدم في الأمم المتحدة كأول خبير مستقل طوال 5 عقود. كيف تشكل الحكومات والمنظمات غير الحكومية ووسائط الإعلام تصورنا لحقوق الإنسان؟ هل تمنع الأجندات الجيوسياسية وأشكال الاستعمار الجديد إقامة نظام دولي ديمقراطي عادل؟ من يعارض إيقاف وتجريم سباق التسلح والتدابير القسرية الأحادية واستخدام المرتزقة لمنع الشعوب من حق تقرير مصيرها؟ كيف يمكننا أن ندافع عن السلام وحقوق الإنسان؟ ولماذا علينا حماية المبلغين أو كاشفي الحقائق من الملاحقة والاضطهاد؟ نرحب بكم ونرى ونسمع أكثر من ألفريد دوزياس المؤلف والخبير بالحقوق المدنية والسياسية في البعد الأقرب هذه الميادين. وأنا زينب صفار، خليكم ويانا. Alfred Deuzeas, former UN independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order, expert for civil and political rights, author of 9 books and more than 200 scholarly articles. Alfred Deuzeas, a Cuban-born American lawyer and author of the trilogy Building a Just World, Countering Mainstream Narratives, Fake News, Fake Law, Fake Freedom, and the last of the trilogy, The Human Rights Industry. Salam and welcome to Al Mayadeen. This is the Proximate Aspect. I'm Zainab Al-Safa. So good to have you, sir.
Thank you for inviting me.
Always a pleasure. Well, Professor Deuzeas, your book, The Human Rights Industry, the last of your trilogy, is an eloquent indictment of international crimes and the corruption of vital international institutions. You documented in this reference, this important reference actually, the hijacking of the human rights system by governments, corporations, and lobbies. Might you elaborate more on the weaponization of human rights, sir?
Well, first of all, let me tell you that I'm not interested in just giving a negative diagnosis. I am far more interested in formulating concrete, implementable, pragmatic solutions to the problems that I have encountered over the last 50 years. As you know, I've been working in the human rights field in various capacities as a consultant, as a senior lawyer for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as a president of a non-governmental organization that regularly speaks in the Human Rights Council, obviously in my capacity as rapporteur. I love working for human rights. I believe in the spirituality of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I want to fix the problems, the hijacking, the double standards that I have seen, especially over the last 20 years. I feel that the situation actually has gotten worse. Governments only give lip service to human rights. The Human Rights Council is not a forum of constructive discussion, is not a forum where you try to show your best, where you try to, um,
Mhm.
through advisory services and technical assistance, help governments improve their human rights record. It is actually a gladiator arena. Governments are only interested in scoring points, only interested
Mhm.
in rather confrontational invective against other countries.
Mhm.
Uh, that brings us nowhere.
Let's try to explore how the narrative managers, as you define them in governments, corporations, NGOs, and the media, shape our perception of human rights and what is actually meant by narrative managers.
I'm glad you're bringing that up because the most serious obstacle we have in the implementation of norms
Mhm.
is the fact that you have non-governmental organizations, you have the media, you have think tanks that are actually denaturing human rights. Uh, Human rights, of course, all emerge from human dignity, our common human dignity. Human rights are the mode d'emploi, how you
Mhm.
achieve your civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. Problem being that the narrative managers in the press, and I mean uh, Reuters, the AP, the New York Times, the
Mhm.
Washington Post, CNN, the Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung, the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, they present already filtered facts. Not only do they engage
Mhm.
in fake news or in fake history, they engage in fake law,
Mhm.
and they try to convince the reader or the viewer that the correct human rights position is A, B, or C. Uh, Bottom line is that most of the non governmental organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the International Service for Human Rights, Reporters Without Borders, etc.,
Mhm.
in one way or another in the service of the elites, in the service of
Mhm.
the
The
collective,
rich and the privileged, of course.
in the service of Washington and Brussels.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the Office of the Human Rights High Commissioner depends very much on voluntary donations. Now, who has the money? Obviously, the collective West. Most of
Sure.
the voluntary contributions come either from the United States or from Europe.
Right.
If you become dependent
Mhm.
not on the UN budget, you become dependent on voluntary contributions, then you're not going to anger those who are giving you the contributions. So you have lost your independence.
So sadly, the human rights system has become a business motivated by the drive for the approval of its rich and self-interested Western patrons. How do the imperialistic fantasies, geopolitical agendas, the sequels of colonialism, as you tend to call them, and the emergence of new forms of economic colonialism endanger the promotion and protection of human rights worldwide, sir?
Well, one of the weapons in this arsenal of the human rights industry is the weapon of unilateral coercive measures, that which you usually refer to as sanctions. As a professor of international law, I'd like to clarify that the only sanctions that can be considered legal in the post World War II context since the adoption of the UN Charter, which is akin to a world constitution. The only legal sanctions are those imposed by the Security Council under Chapter 7. Everything else are unilateral coercive measures. Unilateral coercive measures are condemned by the global majority year after year after year in the General Assembly. The last resolution was adopted in December 2002, Resolution 77 bar 214. It was now recently condemned by the Human Rights Council during the 52nd session on the 3rd of April 2023. And the amazing thing, although there's always a two-thirds majority rejecting these sanctions, is that invariably the United States and the European Union, which ostensibly are there for human rights, they vote against these resolutions. Why? Because they have decided that you can use the demonization of your economic rival, the demonization of your geopolitical rival, and use an accusation of human rights violations to discredit them, reduce their, I would say, standing in the world community, to make it more palatable for a military intervention. The United States has engaged in interventionism all over the world. The United States has toppled governments all over Latin America and still tries to do it. The United States bears an enormous responsibility for the dismantling of the system of protection of human rights in the world. But that is not what you read in the New York Times or in the Washington Post. The narrative that you get is that we in the West, we are by definition the good guys. That means that everybody else,
the good guys that have the right to bully the others.
We assume that we have moral authority over the others, that we have legal authority over the others, which we do not. And but if the press continues repeating the falsehood, these are legal sanctions, the masses, they're not lawyers, they're not professors of law. There's, well, there must be some legality or legitimacy to these sanctions. Now, psychologically, it's dangerous to use the word sanctions because sanctions implies that you are actually punishing the other party and that the other party actually should be punished. So this assumption.
This is the issue of the unilateral coercive measures that is being used against certain countries.
There are at least 35 countries that are directly affected by these sanctions. But then there's the secondary sanctions. Sanctions have done enormous damage in Africa, enormous damage in Latin America and in Asia to countries that have nothing to do with the U.S. querelle against or with the U.S. querelle against China. But they are suffering the consequences. That is why this kind of collective punishment has been condemned again and again.
Sure. Truly, government criminality is contrary to every notion of democracy and the rule of law. As history demonstrates, secrecy is a crucial facilitator of crime and corruption. How can whistleblowers, to whom you pay tribute in your dedication, in your book, help us fix the human rights system that over the years has been hijacked for geopolitical purposes? And how can we help to shield them from persecution and prosecution?
Well, when I was the independent expert on international order, on repeated occasions, I issued press releases demanding the drafting and the adoption of a charter of rights of whistleblowers, referring to whistleblowers as crucial players in any democratic society because governments lie to us, governments commit crimes in our name, and we are entitled to know what crimes are being committed in our name. Now, I have enormous respect for this man, for Edward Snowden. And this book, Permanent Record, I recommend it to all of your viewers and readers, is very, very revealing. Another great book is that of Professor Niels Meltzer. Niels Meltzer is currently the chief legal officer of the International Committee of the Red Cross here in Geneva. Mm-hmm. And he wrote a book on the persecution of Julian Assange, a book that, as far as I'm concerned, is far more important than Emile Zola's J'accuse, mm-hmm. when the Dreyfus affair in 1898. The breakdown of the rule of law in the United Nations, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Sweden, in Ecuador is meticulously documented in this book. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And this is a book about a whistleblower who has shown us what crimes the United States government was committing in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Mm-hmm. Now, there are hundreds of whistleblowers whose names are unknown. There is an Afro-American called Jeffrey Sterling, mm-hmm. who also made important revelations about government criminality. And this day, he's still behind bars. So
sure.
The criminals, meaning the government criminals, have total impunity, whereas those who enlighten us mm-hmm. about crimes committed by these individuals, those end up being persecuted, prosecuted, and thrown in jail. Classical example.
What can we do to shield them against prosecution and persecution, sir? Well, quickly, if I may.
Every country can adopt legislation facilitating, shall we say, kind of like a clearinghouse, mm-hmm. where you can deposit information in an institution that will fact check that information before it gets released to the public, mm-hmm. and that will maintain the anonymity of the whistleblower. Mm-hmm. Internationally, we can have a treaty. We can have a model treaty of judicial protection of whistleblowers. I'm not the only person who has demanded that. I visited Julian Assange mm-hmm. in 2015 at the Ecuadorian embassy, mm-hmm. London. Yes. Writing a report for the General Assembly, and I needed some information from him. I found Julian Assange extremely helpful. He's a very intelligent man, a very sedate man. And I think he's done us, Americans and the world, a great service. And instead of that, he has suffered 12 years of deprivation of liberty.
Of course.
And this farce.
A direct breach of his human right.
A major breach.
I would have to leave this matter here, but I need to benefit from your presence and ask you that in December of last year, 2022, the General Assembly adopted a resolution asking Israel to give up its nuclear arsenal. Those who voted against the resolution were, of course, the US, the UK, Canada, Israel, Micronesia, and Palau. Evidently, the issue of nuclear disarmament still has its enemies, double standards as usual. Why only the focus today, for example, on Iran of getting a nuclear weapon and all the fears that this embarks?
Well, that is the very reason that I wrote my book on the human rights industry, to condemn, to expose and condemn the double standards that are plaguing the entire system. I mean, the human rights promotion and protection system has been essentially in the service of Washington and Brussels, and it is used as a form of neo-colonial coercive system, whereby those countries that do not agree to the policies that the United States wants to impose will then be sanctioned, and then will be defamed in the mainstream media, because you realize that what is our perception of Olaf Scholz or of Rishi Sunak or of Emmanuel Macron, or do we know these people personally? Have we ever talked to them? Of course not. So we get from the corporate media, from the mainstream media, from the media that is completely sold out and is not independent, we get caricatures. We get a positive caricature about Emmanuel Macron. We give a negative caricature of Viktor Orban. We get a positive caricature of Joe Biden, and we get a negative one of Vladimir Putin. So it's the way we think. We are being told how to think.
Yes.
And it takes actually.
It's a kind of indoctrination, sir, right?
It's brainwashing. I was a true blue American, member of the Republican Club at Harvard University, very active when I was a young man, and very much a believer in those norms, in those values of the Constitution of the United States. It just took me decades to realize that the system is not in tune with the Constitution, is not in tune with those values. We only give lip service to the values, but bottom line is that we want to control the world. We want a unipolar world, and anyone who opposes that will be, shall we say, bullied, intimidated, or crushed.
Thank you, sir, for not just only presenting the problem, but also trying to find a plan of action and a recommendation and a solution for the problems that are hampering human rights. True, a better world is indeed possible. Only we, the people, can be the guardians of our rights. Professor Alfred de Zayas, human rights defender and author. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure. إذن بحسب ديزياس من مسؤوليتنا استعادة الديمقراطية وحقنا في المشاركة الفعالة في الشؤون العامة. يمكن ويجب أن تمارس التعددية والتضامن الدولي من قبل الحكومات والجهات الفاعلة من غير الدول على حد سواء لتحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة واستعادة كرامتنا الإنسانية، ومن ثم على منظومة الأمم المتحدة ككل أن ترفض المواجهة بين الكتل والاستفزاز وتصعيد التوترات وإثارة الحروب والصراعات وكراهية الأجانب. يجب أن تتحول تدريجياً الاقتصادات التي تعتمد على المجمع الصناعي العسكري إلى اقتصادات الأمن البشري. ولعل هناك عقبة رئيسية أخرى أمام التقدم في مجال حقوق الإنسان تتمثل في التأثير الشائن لمعظم وسائل إعلام الشركات وحتى الرسمية التي تكذب بلا هوادة وتشوه الحقائق وتزيفها. بهذه الطريقة فقط يمكن ضمان سلام دائم في العالم على أساس مبادئ المساواة في السيادة بين الدول وأحق الشعوب في تقرير مصيرها. ولكن هل فعلا الغرب الأطلسي والمنظمات غير الحكومية وسواها التي يرعاها تسعى للتضامن الدولي والحفاظ على حقوق الإنسان والسلام؟ من كل الميادين سلاما وتحية، في أمان الله.